President Biden is hosting the Prime Minister of Japan at the White House.
That's right. Their meeting comes one day after Attorney General Merrick Garland named a special counsel to oversee an investigation into the discovery of classified materials linked to the president. Trump-appointed former U.S. Attorney Robert Hur released a statement Thursday pledging to conduct the investigation with, quote, fair, impartial, and dispassionate judgment. His appointment came hours after the White House confirmed the discovery of a set of documents marked classified at President Biden's private residence in Wilmington, Delaware. Earlier this week, CBS News first revealed the president's personal lawyers found other documents with classified markings at his former private office in Washington, D.C.
Well, joining us now is CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. Weijia, thanks for joining us. First, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the White House has been transparent about these documents. But as we both know, one set of them was found back in November and a second set last month. And we're only learning about all of this right now. So what is the disconnect?
Well, I think Karine Jean-Pierre is having a difficult time explaining that because it is an outstanding question. There are two types of transparency we're talking about here, and the White House insists that they are practicing it. When it comes to the Justice Department, they say they are fully cooperating with the investigation and providing whatever information and documents that those investigators are asking for. The other question here is the matter of transparency with the American public, and you're absolutely right. That, the White House, President Biden himself, knew about that first batch of documents in November 2nd. The reason why Republicans are especially pointing this out is because the election for midterms happened less than a week after that. Then a second batch was found at his Wilmington home, as you just mentioned, on December 20th. And, even when our colleagues broke this story on Monday, and the White House came out with a lengthy statement about those documents, about how they are cooperating. You know what they didn't talk about was that second batch of documents that they already knew about. And yesterday, when Karine was pressed about this by several reporters, including our very own Ed O'Keefe, her answer was that it was because a review was still ongoing. Well, guess what? The review was still ongoing when they talked about the first batch of documents.
Weijia, of course, this is not happening in a vacuum. And I wonder how this particular controversy is being viewed in light of the fact that at MarALago, President Trump's residence, classified documents were also found. There was a lot of criticism over that. How has that perhaps affected the way in which the discovery of these documents for President Biden, how that controversy is being perceived?
Well, I think that really set the bar. And I think that Attorney General Merrick Garland had no choice here but to appoint a special counsel to investigate the documents. It's hard to tell whether he would have done that if the MarALago documents episode hadn't played out. But because it did, and because he treated that case one way, it would be, as Republicans say, they claim it would be extremely hypocritical if he didn't do that. And so I think if for the appearance alone, that the Attorney General had no choice. Of course, he laid out the reasons why he brought a special counsel when he made the announcement yesterday. He said there were still a lot of questions about how the documents made it out, who did it, and I think, it's hard to tell whether he would have done this anyway, but certainly because that marker was already there, that set the precedent, right, for how to handle this. Because, I think it's really important to talk about the distinctions between the two cases. And the main distinctions are how these two teams and individuals handled the situation after the documents were discovered. In President Trump's case, the former president, did not respond to the National Archives, would not willingly turn them over, was not cooperating. In this case, President Biden and his whole team has reiterated that they're fully cooperating. They alerted the Justice Department right away, the National Archives. So that is distinct. What's not, though, Elaine and Michelle, is the fact that these classified documents were removed and they were classified. They ended up somewhere they were not supposed to be. That is the same in both cases. Now, of course, we don't know yet about the planning. We don't know the motive. We don't know the intent. We don't know the criminality. But the actions all, ended up with two presidents being investigated. And so it is a tricky situation, but to answer your question, it's hard to tell exactly how Trump's case impacted President Biden's.
I think a lot of Americans don't have a clue as to why, or myself included in that, as to how a president or former president or anyone for that matter would go about seeking, retrieving classified documents, and how do they get out of the hands of the archives in the first place or the White House? So it's just a big question mark, I think, for a lot of people. It's hard to discern one way or another.
What were the procedures?
Yeah,
that were
what are
followed?
the procedures? And I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of that.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what the special counsel finds out. Yeah.
But we also mentioned, of course, that President Biden was hosting the Japanese Prime Minister today. What's at the center of that meeting?
So I think the most important conversation they will have will be about defense spending and just reiterating the U.S.-Japan alliance. This is an incredibly important relationship. In fact, the president's first foreign visit was from Japan back in April 2021. It was a different prime minister at the time, Suga, but it was still Japan because President Biden wanted to emphasize how important it is to cooperate with regard to, protecting that entire region because aggression from China and North Korea continues to ramp up. Japan has announced that they have intended to increase their military spending to 2% of their GDP by 2027. And we also know that for the first time since World War II, they have changed their policy to allow preemptive strikes, which is a big deal because, says a lot about how they feel about the threats that could potentially come their way. This visit is ahead of the G7 summit because Japan is hosting that in Hiroshima in May, and so the prime minister is going to all the countries, all the six other nations, I should say, ahead of that to sort of set the table about what that conversation will be. But this is a very important meeting for the president as they continue to figure out ways to be competitive in that region and to protect people there as well as here from those ongoing threats.
All right, Weijia Jiang, another busy day at the White House. Weijia, thank you.
Sure.